to the news on BBC One.
Now at 10 o'clock, the news with Hugh Edwards.
Tonight at 10, Theresa May is back in Downing Street, but her parliamentary majority is gone and Britain has a hung parliament. Her decision to call an early election has backfired. Mrs May will now try to govern with the support of Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionists.
I have just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, and I will now form a government that can provide certainty and lead Britain forward at this critical time for our country.
And later, the Prime Minister expressed her regret at the result and her sorrow for those Conservatives who'd lost their seats. Labour made gains across Britain, confounding many predictions, as Jeremy Corbyn said his party was the real winner.
Incredible result for the Labour Party because people voted for hope. Young people and old people all came together yesterday. Very high turnout, huge increase in the Labour vote.
We'll have the full result for you, with the Conservatives on 318, Labour on 262 seats, and both parties having increased their share of the vote. In Northern Ireland, the Democratic Unionist Party, with 10 seats, agreed to try to help the Conservatives to stay in power.
The Prime Minister has spoken with me this morning, and we will enter discussions with the Conservatives to explore how it may be possible to bring stability to our nation.
In Scotland, a challenging night for the SNP. They lost a third of their seats. The former leader, Alex Salmond, was among those defeated. After a collapse in UKIP's share of the vote and no MPs, the party leader, Paul Nuttall, has resigned. And with just 10 days to the start of the Brexit talks, we'll be reporting on the far-reaching implications for the future of the United Kingdom.
Much more news and analysis throughout the day. We will bring you reaction from around the UK, Europe and the rest of the world to this result, and we'll be covering all the live events as they happen.
Good evening from Downing Street, where Theresa May is trying to construct a new government and face the challenge of the imminent Brexit process, having lost her majority in the House of Commons, while Labour has made unexpected gains. The Conservatives emerged from yesterday's election as the largest party, but with no parliamentary majority, and they're hoping to rely on Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionists to stay in power. The Prime Minister said she felt sorry for colleagues who'd lost their seats and said she would be reflecting on the lessons. So this is the final outcome of this general election. The Conservatives have 318 seats. That is 8 short of a basic majority. Labour has 262, the SNP 35, the Lib Dems 12, the Democratic Unionist Party 10, Plaid Cymru 4. The Conservatives lost 13 seats overall. They had been expecting some big gains. Labour added 30, while the SNP lost 21. So Theresa May is still Prime Minister, but there are questions now about the viability of this new administration. And in this extended programme, we'll have the results, we'll have reaction, we'll have analysis, and we'll consider the implications both for Brexit and for Scottish independence. First, our political editor Laura Kuenssberg reports on a night and day of intense political drama.
Is this strong and stable, Prime Minister?
She who dares doesn't always win. The most votes, the most seats. But under this stinging glare, no iron gates nor police protection can shield Theresa May from the accusation she looks a political loser. The trappings of power, the visit to the palace, help from Northern Irish MPs mean she can gather enough support to stay on. But having believed herself to be on the brink of a sizable majority, going backwards seems like defeat.
I have just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, And I will now form a government that can provide certainty and lead Britain forward at this critical time for our country. This government will guide the country through the crucial Brexit talks that begin in just 10 days.
Not a single mention of the result.
What the country needs more than ever is certainty. And having secured the largest number of votes and the greatest number of seats in the general election, it is clear that only the Conservative and Unionist Party has the legitimacy and ability to provide that certainty by commanding a majority in the House of Commons. This will allow us to come together as a country and channel our energies towards a successful Brexit deal that works for everyone in this country, securing a new partnership with the EU which guarantees our long-term prosperity. That's what people voted for last June. That's what we will deliver. Now let's get to work.
So Theresa May walks back into number 10, still Prime Minister, but damaged, diminished, a smaller figure.
Jeremy Corbyn is not the victor. Labour lost as badly as they did in 2010, but he looks it. Behind by nearly 60 seats, but so much further on than anyone expected. Many young voters' dreams, the Tories' nightmare.
Incredible result for the Labour Party because people voted for hope. Young people and old people all came together yesterday. Very high turnout, huge increase in the Labour vote, and they did it because they want to see things done differently and they want hope in their lives.
Coffee for Tory staffers this morning instead of celebratory champagne. The loss of so many seats burst their balloons.
Are you stepping down, Mrs May?
Traditional election rules showed few clues to Theresa May's retreat.
Boris, does your party need a new leader? Should it be you?
By morning, words in the wind of ministers who might think of their own manoeuvres. Because what was surprise at the start...
And what we're saying is the Conservatives are the largest party. Note, they don't have an overall majority at this stage.
Gradually, seat after seat, was glorious shock for Labour. Loss after loss for the Conservatives. No obvious pattern or geography to start with. But a hung parliament.
We'll keep the red flag flying here.
With no overall winner becoming clear.
We cannot see any way at all that the Conservatives can get to the 326 mark, and we think it's pretty clear that there is going to be a hung parliament.
Was he grabbing a victory of sorts? Well, over the sceptics in his party.
Politics isn't going back into the box where it was before.
What had seemed her unassailable lead at the start just melted away. Personal as well as political loss written all over her face.
As we ran this campaign, we set out to consider the issues that are the key priorities for the British people.
The Tories care about winning. It wasn't long for the first call for her to go.
She's a very talented woman and she doesn't shy from difficult decisions, but she now has to obviously consider her position.
But no others publicly joined. Discipline, perhaps, or some cheer from Tories' big wins in Scotland. A separate campaign fought with 13 seats won. Levels of support not seen for years. The Tories and Labour in Scotland dragged the SNP down from their high point. The bubble pricked, even for Alex Salmond. Other parties took heavy fire. The Lib Dems adding seats, but losing their biggest household name, Nick Clegg, perhaps loved and loathed.
Nuttall, Paul Andrew, UKIP.
And in reverse, another UKIP leader took his leave. No party, though, can govern alone. Meet the 10-strong Democratic Unionist Party, Northern Irish MPs who'll prop Theresa May up.
The Prime Minister has spoken with me this morning and we will enter discussions with the Conservatives to explore how it may be possible to bring stability to our nation.
Others, though, calling for her to go.
We will work with others if it is at all possible to keep the Tories out of government.
She put her party before her country. She has been found out. She should be ashamed.
It's an act the Westminster Circus did not expect.
I think Labour MPs have been shocked by how well we've done. A lot of them will recognise Jeremy's here, will take us into the next election, and they will start to work with him.
Well, I think we've witnessed a political earthquake, and I am going to be the first or second or third person to say that Jeremy has had a character explosion.
You must accept, though, that a hung parliament makes the government less stable, less strong.
I accept this isn't the result we wanted. It's not a great result. I'm not here sugarcoating this view. I'm telling you that of the options, once the people have decided at the ballot box, this is the clear one that gives the country certainty.
But only late this afternoon did the Prime Minister acknowledge that anything had gone wrong.
I had wanted to achieve a larger majority, but that was not the result that we secured. And I'm sorry for all those candidates and hard-working party workers who weren't successful.
She won more votes, more seats. She keeps this address. But her gamble failed. The electorate can damn with faint praise. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Downing Street.
Well, 7 weeks ago, the Prime Minister stood here in Downing Street and insisted that she needed a strong electoral mandate to underpin the forthcoming Brexit negotiations. And in the early stages of the campaign, there was no suggestion in surveys of public opinion that the political gamble might not pay off. But the result, when all the votes were counted, was the disappearance overnight of Mrs May's majority and a hung parliament, despite an increase in the Conservative share of the vote. Our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar takes a closer look at Mrs May's gamble and how it failed.
Who expected to hear or tell this tale today? The story of a leader and her party that felt unstoppable, at times seemed lost, then ended up mocked by enemies and seen by the rest as having gone from strong and stable to weak and wobbly. Theresa May on top of her party, but no longer truly in charge. There'd been a turning point.
I thought it was awful. The campaign was going swimmingly well until we launched our own manifesto and we did the triple assault upon our core vote, which were the elderly.
Mrs May never looked like stumbling at the start.
For strong and stable leadership to take
It was all about her, Britain's most trusted leader, most of all by older voters.
We will deliver for Britain. Thank you.
But a new social care policy left thousands, including natural Conservative supporters, fearing their family homes might go to pay care bills after they'd gone. That forced a U-turn she unconvincingly tried to deny.
Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. We are offering a long-term solution for the sustainability of social care for the future.
But no one really believed it.
Are you embarrassed by this U-turn, Prime Minister?
And Tory poll ratings suffered. Furious Tories blamed her close and powerful advisers and Theresa May's way of relying on them. Fiona Hill and especially Nick Timothy, who's said to have come up with a vote loser of a plan. Will he last? Through the campaign, TV and radio appearances were dominated by a tiny handful of trusted ministers, one in particular who was sent to debate when her boss said no.
Theresa May may not be here, but I hope to make a good fist of setting out the Conservative Party policy.
Today the focus is on Tories who want more of a role and more power for the cabinet as a whole. Life isn't going to be easy in the future. Would a bit more cabinet discussion, cabinet government help? What's your view on that?
There have been a lot of complaints, a lot of feeling that things have been decided by a small group of people and ministers have not been consulted. And I think the Prime Minister would be wise to pay attention to this feeling that ministers need to be included in all decisions. And, you know, any decision that affects their department, I mean, it's absurd if they're not consulted.
A pupil that other schools...
Theresa May's own credit with voters seemed to fade the longer the campaign went on, once when she was defending Tory spending plans.
In the Labour Party's manifesto, we know the figures don't add up. What is important is that as we look...
What? Okay.
You
What?
clearly failed.
Just please let the Prime Minister answer.
Sorry.
2 terrorist attacks during the campaign made this an election like no other. Mrs May claimed to be the leader to keep Britain safe, but she was challenged time and again about police cuts. Austerity was costing Conservatives support.
Jeremy Corbyn tapped into the feeling of anti-austerity in the country, and I certainly picked that up on the doorstep where people were waning of austerity and wanted to hear something different.
It's too late now for Theresa May to correct some of the failures of her campaign, but there is time to pay the price as she plans a parliamentary programme, knowing anything that upsets her MPs risks a humiliating defeat. She'd hoped to win more freedom on Brexit. The danger now is that her hands may be tied. The Prime Minister's big gamble failed. Today she's spoken of 5 more years in office. But when you're under this kind of pressure, time can fly quickly between one crisis and the next. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, Labour gained 30 seats last night across Britain, forcing many of Jeremy Corbyn's opponents in the party to admit that they had underestimated him and his ability to enthuse younger voters. Mr Corbyn says that this was an incredible result for Labour. Our correspondent Vicky Young looks at how and where those Labour gains were achieved.
It wasn't victory, but to Jeremy Corbyn and his most ardent fans it felt almost as sweet. Many had written him off. Instead, he's delivered Labour's largest increase in the share of the vote since the war. His team say he offered voters hope, a positive vision.
They want Jeremy's slogan when he stood as leader, straight talking, honest politics. That's what they want. They want someone to come forward and say, this is what I believe in, this is what I want to implement, and this is what I'm going to do. And they support that type of politics.
It was exactly what these huge, enthusiastic crowds wanted. All over the country, Mr Corbyn took his message.
Our manifesto offers something very, very different.
He promised higher pay, more free childcare to scrap tuition fees, paid for by higher taxes on corporations and the wealthy. And when the results rolled in, it seemed that younger voters were behind the Labour surge.
Rosemary Clare Duffield is duly elected Member of Parliament for this district.
The university city of Canterbury, a seat which had been held by the Conservatives for 100 years. Now, Labour. Some think their success stemmed from videos on social media, which had tens of millions of views and shares.
I think a lot of young people as well don't necessarily read all the newspapers that were kind of doing their smear campaign against Jeremy Corbyn. So I think people underestimated actually how effective sharing stories and photographs how effective that was going to be.
I paid the university fees, and for people going back their word, it's just so refreshing to see somebody who I think will stick to his word.
What do you think about his image and the campaign he ran?
I think he did well. I mean, he did turn up to all the debates and stuff. Theresa May didn't.
I just think that people are quite interested in his kind of anti-establishment rhetoric and how he's kind of always sat on the back benches and just been fighting for like small people, for like the little man, for like 30 odd years.
Insiders here at Labour HQ say this result was absolutely a victory for Jeremy Corbyn. They say he enthused voters, especially the young, by offering clear, popular policies. The question now is whether Labour MPs will finally accept his leadership. Last year, Mr Corbyn was challenged for the top job. Today, his former rival was eating humble pie.
Well, I was clearly wrong in feeling that Jeremy wouldn't be able to do this well, and I think he's proved me wrong and lots of people wrong, and I take my hat off to him. I don't know what Jeremy's got, but if we could bottle it and drink it, we'd all be doing very well.
Others praise Mr Corbyn's performance, but point out that power is still some way off.
We can win over former Conservative voters, but we need to understand why, despite the fact that they often identify with our values, they didn't vote for us this time. And so that's not a negative process, it's a positive process building on the leap forward that we've had at this general election.
Labour Party candidate, 16,333 votes.
And tonight, the final result of the 2017 election, Labour took Kensington from the Conservatives by just 20 votes. Labour has now lost 3 general elections in a row.
Well, we're just walking down the street to our home now. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for coming.
But the infighting of the past 2 years is forgotten for now. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, Halifax was one of the key marginal seats in this election, a Labour seat with a majority of just 428. It was high on the Conservative target list, and Theresa May unveiled her manifesto there. But the voters of Halifax returned a Labour MP to Westminster with a substantially increased majority of more than 5,000. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has been speaking to voters there about the issues that mattered to them.
There was trouble at the mill for Theresa May. Dean Clough Mill in Halifax was where she came to unveil her manifesto last month. Jordan and Deryn work for a business in the now converted factory. Jordan became a Labour convert.
Originally I was going to vote for Conservative, like I did in 2010. I did change my mind probably about halfway through this campaign, and that was just because the amount of times Theresa May has changed her mind on certain things, her own policies. It's not someone who I wanted negotiating Brexit.
And traditional Labour voters here didn't desert the party.
She was saying she was offering strong and stable leadership, but she didn't turn up for debates, which I didn't think was... It's like a job interview really, having a debate.
Launching the manifesto, Halifax looked eminently winnable. The plan was it would be a symbol of Tory inroads in Yorkshire.
Let us all go forward together.
The room looks a little different now from when Theresa May was here to launch her manifesto, but 3 long weeks later, so does her position. That manifesto with the so-called dementia tax served only to help alienate some of the people who were thinking about switching to the Tories.
Looking round the Mills gallery, Sephora was put off by the Prime Minister's plans to cut school lunches and by one of her rare TV grillings.
I was influenced by the Question Time debate in which one of the nurses had asked Theresa May a question regarding the pay rise that hasn't happened, and Theresa May to that question responded saying that we have no money and there's no money tree, so nothing can happen.
Even those who voted Tory thought Mrs May's campaign wasn't heading in the right direction.
She could have followed Jeremy Corbyn's lead and stood outside and talked to everybody. I think she'd have gained more respect then.
Some tactical voting helped Labour, as did a UKIP vote that didn't go all the Tories' way.
We didn't see it just automatically going to the Conservatives yesterday. Much more mixed picture, and I think we did ourselves proud. People coming back to us.
The Conservatives brought the manifesto to Halifax, but the town read it and said no. Lucy Manning, BBC News, Halifax.
Well, here in Downing Street tonight, Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor, has joined us. And Laura, the Prime Minister earlier today, you were here listening to her, talked about being in power for 5 years. She mentioned the 5-year period. Is that credible?
Well, I think it's certainly optimistic. Tonight, certainly, it seems very ambitious of Theresa May to be hoping that she'll still be here living above the shop in Downing Street in 5 years' time. Look, I think there's consensus among Tories today after the dramatic events overnight. Their expectations so dashed that today was not the day, tomorrow won't be the day, that in terms of rallying around her, creating some kind of sense of pause, some kind of sense of stability, as the leader of the largest party with the largest number of seats, she has the right, supported by colleagues, to stay on to try to form a government. In normal times, she'd have probably been out the door by now because the Tories care about power. They are ruthless when it comes to leaders who look like losers. But these are not normal times. The Brexit negotiations, of course, are almost upon us, and therefore there is this sort of window where Theresa May is being given a chance to steady the ship. I have to say, though, there are senior Conservatives who are saying it is not tenable to imagine her staying in the medium term, and the medium term could feel like quite a short period of time. She's got a Queen's speech to get through on the 19th of June. Shortly after that, her first European summit. Could be a very eventful few weeks indeed.
How does her position contrast with Jeremy Corbyn's?
Oh, it's a total contrast. It's on its head. Expectations for him at the beginning of the campaign were rock bottom, and now he's soared over those expectations. What's happened in the last 24 hours, what he always hoped for, putting together a coalition of old Labour voters, people who were cross about the Iraq War, younger voters being enthused for the first time, stitching that together with Greens, with former Lib Dems to produce a sort of coalition that could actually make inroads in the broader election. electorate. That has, for now, insulated him. He has relished, it seems, almost every moment of this campaign, because what he has always been is a campaigner. Now, whether or not when they get back to the day-to-day ground of the House of Commons, that positivity around his leadership will remain, that's a different question. But the experience for him of this campaign has been to strengthen his leadership. No question about that.
Laura, in a while, we'll be back and we'll talk about the challenges facing Theresa May and the Brexit process. But for now, thanks very much. Because as we've heard, the politics of Northern Ireland are now even more significant than usual at Westminster. The Prime Minister's decision to rely on the support of the Democratic Unionist Party has far-reaching implications not only for that Brexit process, but also for the future of devolved government in Northern Ireland. The DUP won 10 of Northern Ireland's 18 seats. Sinn Féin gained 3, they now have 7. The SDLP and the Ulster Unionist Party lost all of their MPs. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Buckler joins us now at Stormont.
Hugh, the DUP tend to vote with the Conservatives, but now the Tories need their support in Parliament. This election result has given them unexpected influence. Power sharing here at Stormont may have collapsed months ago, but their new position as kingmakers and deal makers at Westminster has given them something of a say in the UK government. If last night's count revealed any winner, it was the Democratic Unionist Party. The DUP now hold more than half of Northern Ireland's seats at Westminster. And their 10 MPs could offer Theresa May what she wanted most from this election: some stability. Although Arlene Foster has indicated that that will come at a price.
What we want to see happening is a recognition of the particular circumstances of Northern Ireland, recognising our history and our geography. We've always said that we want the best deal for Northern Ireland, and that's certainly what we'll be pushing for.
Along with money for Northern Ireland's economy, the DUP is thought to want influence in the upcoming Brexit negotiations. Questions about what will happen to Northern Ireland's land border with the Republic have become a major concern, although the party has always seen itself as British rather than European.
We say never!
Founded by the Protestant preacher Ian Paisley, the DUP's religious roots are deeply important.
Storm it, hear us clear!
It's clashed with campaigners over its decision to block the introduction of same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland.
Hello, I didn't hear the question, sorry.
The other big beasts of politics here are Sinn Féin. They won 7 seats,
Yes, Jerry Adams.
but as Irish Republicans, they won't sit in a British Parliament, actually helping Mrs May by reducing the numbers she needs for a majority.
Remember, the history will show alliances between Ulster Unionism and British Unionism has always ended in tears.
What might bring stability to Westminster could end up causing real problems here at Stormont. Power sharing collapsed at the start of this year, and talks to try to restore it have been organised by Theresa May's government. But if they're being propped up by the DUP, it's difficult to see how Sinn Féin could accept them as honest brokers in those negotiations. Among those concerned is Jonathan Powell. As Tony Blair's Chief of Staff, he helped negotiate the Good Friday peace agreement, and he's warning that decades of progress could be undone.
I don't think it's worth undermining everything we've achieved in Northern Ireland. There's a reason that Northern Ireland is no longer on our news pages. Do we really want to put it back there? If we do this, we stand the risk of doing so.
The Prime Minister very much.
Arlene Foster and Theresa May both have much to gain from this friendship.
Everything going well? Yes.
But it is likely to be tested. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Belfast.
Well, in Scotland, it was a challenging night for the Scottish National Party, which lost a third of its seats at Westminster. They ended the night with 35 seats. The Conservatives have 13, Labour 7, and the Lib Dems 4. The SNP's former leader, the former First Minister Alex Salmond, lost his seat to the Conservatives, as did the party's Westminster leader Angus Robertson. Our Scotland editor Sarah Smith reports now on what happened in the Scottish constituencies. There are some flashing images in the report.
Struggling to put on a brave face today, Nicola Sturgeon knows her demand for another Scottish referendum has just been rejected by Scotland's voters.
In Scotland, the SNP won this election. We have more seats than all of the other parties combined. However, it is an inescapable fact that we also suffered some bitterly disappointing losses last night.
Do you accept this result means there will not be a second referendum on independence anytime soon?
Undoubtedly, the issue of an independence referendum was a factor in this election result, but I think there were other factors in this election result as well. So I will reflect on that and come to considered judgments, and as I say, I'll say more about that in the days to come.
This is where, just 3 months ago, Nicola Sturgeon confidently demanded the right to have another referendum on Scottish independence. That now looks like a significant mistake. She admits it's one reason why her party suffered significant losses, and now there seems almost no chance she'll get that independence vote.
Douglas Ross, Scottish Conservative and
Seeing the
Unionist,
SNP's Westminster leader, Angus Robertson, unseated was one of the night's more dramatic moments. Significant Tory gains across Scotland, 12 new seats, have helped keep Theresa May in Downing Street tonight. And they're convinced it was their promise to block another referendum that created those victories.
Nobody, not me, not anyone, is expecting the SNP to give up on independence. That is what it believes, and it is a perfectly honourable position to take. But what people do expect is that right now, the SNP gives Scotland a break. Simply put, Scotland has had its fill.
Scottish Labour are also claiming victory of a sort. Now with 7 MPs up from just 1, they're back from the brink of extinction, saved by a Corbyn surge, despite the Scottish leadership's opposition to him.
And the success of our results here is that combined message of being a pro-union party, talking up the benefits of the United Kingdom, but also showing how we can do things differently from today, how to reject austerity and build a better future for the many.
The Lib Dems got their Scottish tally up to 4, also by opposing another referendum. Glasgow, last weekend, saw a huge pro-independence march. Passionate yes voters convinced independence is practically inevitable. Now it looks like they'll have to wait a lot longer before they get the chance to try again. Tonight it's become clear that Ruth Davidson's not entirely comfortable with this alliance with the DUP and their opposition to same-sex marriage. She herself is engaged to her female partner, and she says she has talked to Theresa May tonight to seek a categorical assurance there would be no dilution of LGBT rights in Great Britain, and she says the Prime Minister assured her she would seek to advance equal rights in Northern Ireland.
Sarah, thank you very much. Sarah Smith, our Scotland editor there in Edinburgh with the latest. Well, in Wales, the Labour Party had a strong night, taking back a number of seats from the Conservatives. They ended up with 28 seats, while the Conservatives won 8 and Plaid Cymru won 4. The Lib Dems lost their only Welsh MP. The Conservatives had initially hoped to make gains, especially in those areas which voted strongly to leave the EU. Our Wales correspondent Sian Lloyd has more details.
In Gower this morning, the smiles of Welsh Labour said it all. The party's leader introducing 2 of their 3 new MPs here. This seat was one they'd been desperate to win back from the Conservatives.
Yeah, we were told a few weeks ago that we'd struggle in Wales, that we'd lose seats, but...
He was the man who'd led a very separate Labour campaign in Wales, but today Carwyn Jones was happy to acknowledge the Jeremy Corbyn factor in their successes here.
We ran a Welsh Labour campaign in Wales in tandem with the campaign across the rest of the UK. We listened, we worked hard, we produced a manifesto that people liked, and of course we saw us gaining seats in Wales.
Labour not only made gains here, but they increased the size of their majority in many Welsh seats. It appears they took votes from UKIP that the Conservatives had been banking on, and other parties were squeezed.
What seems to have happened, and quite clearly happened, is that the smaller parties, Plaid Cymru and the Liberal Democrats, have faded away, and that centre-left vote in Wales has gone and sat firmly in the Labour column.
Plaid Cymru celebrated winning Ceredigion. The Nationalists took it from the Liberal Democrats, who no longer have any Welsh MPs. But it was a mixed night for Leanne Wood's party. They saw their share of the vote in Wales fall overall.
It has been a difficult election, yes. I mean, certainly it was run between Tory, Labour, Corbyn, May, and it was difficult for us to get in there.
It was while walking in Snowdonia that Theresa May decided she would call a snap election. A decision that cost her party here dear. Sian Lloyd, BBC News, Gower.
Earlier today, the leader of UKIP, Paul Nuttall, resigned after his party failed to win a single seat at Westminster. Party's share of the popular vote fell by more than 10%. In sharp contrast to the 4 million or so votes it won back in 2015, our political correspondent Alex Forsyth reports now on UKIP's collapse.
A brave face, but a bruising result.
Morning, everyone.
UKIP's leader came third here in Boston and Skegness, losing thousands of votes. A picture replicated across the country, prompting this.
I am standing down today as the leader of UKIP with immediate effect.
The party struggled to find its way since the EU referendum, losing support in droves. But even after quitting, he insists UKIP's not finished.
I believe the worst is over. The party is still on the pitch of British politics.
In Clacton, voters aren't sure. This was the seat of UKIP's only MP. Last night, their vote plummeted. Some supporters switching to the Tories because of Brexit.
The UKIP done their job, and to get the Brexit up and running, which they achieved.
More surprising to some, Labour gained from the party's collapse too, winning over this couple who've both voted UKIP before.
I was Labour yesterday, and it was basically public services.
I didn't feel that voting UKIP this time round would have a benefit here. I rather hoped that more UKIP would have gone towards Labour.
It seems many of the party's supporters, even in its strongholds, think that vote to leave the EU meant UKIP's job was done. But some say the overall election result and the uncertainty that creates for the Brexit process will mean that UKIP becomes relevant again. Like their former party leader, who hasn't ruled out a return.
You know, we're looking potentially at a serious backsliding on Brexit, and if that happens, UKIP will pick up support again very, very quickly.
Is there a chance you'll go back to UKIP as a possible leader?
I don't want to. You know, I was happy with what I'd done, but if we do not get the kind of Brexit that I was expecting us to get and the people want us to get, I would have no choice but to throw myself back into full-time campaigning.
But for now, the party's taken a battering. Its leader and future in question. Its direction unclear. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Clacton.
So let's take a closer look at the stream of results which started before midnight last night and soon pointed the way to an outcome that few people had expected. Here's Jeremy Vine with his guide to all the key numbers and seats and parties.
Let's look at the changed map of the UK after another absolutely shocking election result. So here, first of all, you see the SNP's yellow in Scotland driven back, the Scottish Nationalists losing more than a third of their seats. And if I flash the gains, you can see Labour advancing in places like Canterbury here, where they overturned a 10,000 Conservative majority. There's also a bit more Liberal Democrat orange on the map in places like Oxford West and Abingdon, so heart for the Liberal Democrats. What exactly has happened? Well, the Conservatives came first, there's no doubt about that. Have a look at the percentages here, 44% to Theresa May. But it's Jeremy Corbyn's 41% that is remarkable. A close second. It's thought many, many young voters pouring in to support Labour. The Liberal Democrats bumping along a bit on 8%, although they are focusing their vote better this time and winning some more seats. The Greens on 2, 1 seat for them. And UKIP on 2% is a big part of this story. Their voters crashed since the last general election. Look at that, down 11%. And it was thought it would go straight to the Conservatives, but it surely didn't. Labour benefited as well. Coming to our virtual House of Commons, because this is where all the action will be now. Have a look at the government benches. So, the Conservatives have 318 seats. They are the largest single party, but they're short of what is called an overall majority. You need 326 to be able to outvote all the other MPs put together. So, the Tories have a problem here. Let's have a look at the opposition benches, shall we? An improved Labour Party here on 262, about 30 up on last time. The SNP, by contrast, in Scotland, down more than a third, 35 MPs now. A dozen for the Liberal Democrats. In Northern Ireland, the DUP, the Democratic Unionists, celebrating their 10. Sinn Féin have 7. Plaid Cymru in Wales 4. The Green one is Caroline Lucas, and the Independent there, by the way, is a Northern Ireland MP. Nobody from UKIP in the House of Commons. There are more than 200 female MPs for the first time. So that in itself is interesting. But let's go back to the challenge facing the Conservatives. They're going to have a working arrangement with the Democratic Unionists because they're short by 8. So we bring the Democratic Unionists in and we put their 10 MPs onto the government benches, and lo and behold, majority of 6. 6 is very, very slender. It's going to be very, very difficult to govern. They'll have to listen hard to what this party from Northern Ireland is asking for, and it's embarrassing, humiliating for the Prime Minister, Theresa May.
Jeremy Vine there with the illustration of the numbers in the Commons. By the way, you can find out about the result in your constituency by visiting bbc.co.uk/election 2017. Go to that results section, you can put in your postcode there, and then you can get the full result details for your particular seat. Well, as we've heard, the gains made by Labour across Britain may in part have been driven by an increased turnout of younger voters. Jeremy referred to that there. There's been a greater swing to Labour in seats with a higher population of 18 to 24-year-olds. Our correspondent Elaine Dunkley reports on the impact of the youth vote on last night's results.
From Grime MCs to NME, youth culture has provided the soundtrack for change in this general election.
I'm here today to speak to Jeremy Corbyn. What's going on, man? Handshake hug.
Lovely to see you.
Thanks
for coming along.
No, thank you for having me, bro. Seriously.
I went to Derby North. 13,000 18 to 24-year-olds live here.
How excited were you about the sort of election results as were coming through last night?
Excited, yeah.
Early indications suggest the youth vote was Labour's gain, with their policies to reintroduce housing benefits for under-21s and the scrapping of tuition fees.
I voted for Jeremy Corbyn because of my future as a primary school teacher. I do feel that children need those opportunities to thrive in school, and without food and daily care, they're not going to thrive off that. So part of his manifesto was to improve that. So yeah, I voted for Jeremy Corbyn.
Last year for the EU referendum, I was just too young to be able to vote in it. So I felt this year it gave me a chance to sort of have my say, whereas I felt a bit cheated out of it in the referendum last year.
Often young people are always complaining about how it's the older generations voting, and I think the fact that Jeremy Corbyn actually targeted students and young people and stuff like the minimum wage and things like that, it really appealed to us young people.
It's believed Jeremy Corbyn has mobilised a jilted generation, unable to get on the property ladder and saddled with debt.
For many young voters, this wasn't just about policy. Personality also played a big part.
Femi Oyeniran is an actor, director and activist behind the hashtag Grime for Corbyn.
The mainstream press, like the majority of the tabloids, were deriding Corbyn and made him the underdog. And young people like the underdog. He became almost like a cult figure. There were people wearing T-shirts with Jeremy Corbyn on it.
It's difficult to put an exact figure on it, but there is a real sense of an awakening of apathetic young voters, galvanised by Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, a generation who want to be heard. Elaine Dunkley, BBC News.
So, for the second time in the past 3 general elections, the United Kingdom has a hung parliament, and Theresa May, as we've said, will try to form that government with the help of the Democratic Unionist Party. But the process of governing with such a slender majority will not be an easy task, to put it mildly. Our home editor, Mark Easton, looks at the challenges presented by a hung parliament and what the road ahead could look like.
The dice were thrown, and the 2017 election game just got a whole lot more complicated. Without enough Tory MPs to outvote the rest of the Commons, Theresa May's decided to try to play on anyway.
This board game from the early 70s is from an era when Britain also saw party leaders trying to run the country without a majority in the House of Commons. And then, as now, they faced a choice: a formal coalition with another party, or trying to muddle through vote by vote in a minority government.
There was a coalition, of course, in 2010 when David Cameron negotiated a formal agreement with Nick Clegg of the Liberal Democrats.
The government's ability to control events was dealt a further blow today.
But Theresa May's position is more like John Major in the mid-1990s. His small majority disappeared during the Parliament, and the fractious politics of the time meant he was forced to act like a minority government for many years.
In the John Major time, we were bringing people in. There was a vote that was won by one vote, people coming in on stretchers. I mean, we could be back to those scenes.
Former head of the Civil Service, Lord Gus O'Donnell, worked at the heart of both Major's government and Cameron's coalition.
The coalition is very formal. You've got a coalition agreement, they sit down, they talk, they go through their whole programme. come to minority, it's very much more political deals, made usually in the House of Commons, the classic smoke-filled rooms we saw in the 1970s. So it's much more ad hoc.
New legislation will be introduced.
The Queen's speech, the budget, votes of no confidence. The Democratic Unionists may support Theresa May through key votes, but everything else will be open to negotiation. Civil servants will be urging the Prime Minister to drop any legislation that might prove difficult to get through. In a minority government, the manifesto is more a wish list than a promise to the country. Minority governments are fragile creatures, as Labour's Ramsay MacDonald found in 1924. His administration survived just 9 months.
What you'd ideally like to do with a minority government is operate for a while, get the confidence of the nation, and then try and get another election to move
Another
away.
election? Brenda's going to be outraged.
Indeed she is. I'm very sorry, Brenda.
Not another one?
Mr Wilson, the first to arrive at number 10 to begin.
Harold Wilson was one of the last prime ministers to try to run the country with a minority. He had to call another election just 6 months later. They are rare things. In the game of minority governments, there are rarely any winners. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, Mrs May's case for calling an election when she'd promised not to do so until 2020 was to boost her majority in Parliament and, as she put it, strengthen her hand in the Brexit negotiations. So what effect does this outcome have on the government's Brexit approach and the all-important timetable? The President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, says that he is ready for talks to start tomorrow morning, if that's needed. Our chief correspondent, Gavin Hewitt, has been looking at the impact of the election result on the future of the Brexit process.
Theresa May's authority diminished just when the start of Brexit negotiations are days away. Complex negotiations have suddenly become more challenging.
I think it's made it more difficult for whoever is going to be negotiating with the European Union, because they're going to look and say, well, hold on, it was not such a clear message from your general election. It's not clear that you can get everything through the House of Commons. So I suspect the negotiations have just become that little bit more tough.
Some of those who campaign to leave the EU fear momentum will be lost. This is the Brexit timetable. Negotiations begin on June the 19th, a week on Monday. They have to be completed in 2 years. The 29th of March 2019 is the leaving date. Pro-EU campaigners out today claim the election sent a message.
I think what the country has just said is we do not want a hard Brexit, we do not want to leave a single market. So I think it's about going ahead with putting the country's interests first, which is finding a package which means that the UK is not jumping off a cliff.
Others are arguing that what some call a hard Brexit, which involves leaving the European single market, is now less likely.
There is a greater chance now that we'll get a softer Brexit than there was before this election. But whether or not we definitely will, I think we'll have to wait and see, because there are still many members of the Parliamentary Conservative Party who are committed to a hard Brexit.
Others were insisting today the election result changed nothing.
When the European Union faces Theresa May or David Davis across the negotiating table, they will be facing the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the Secretary of State for Brexit, and they will deal with them on that basis. So I don't really think that this makes the task more difficult than it otherwise would be.
The reaction from Europe, a reminder that a clock is ticking. There's no time to lose. We're ready, they said today.
I do strongly hope that Britain will stay ready to open negotiations. As far as the Commission is concerned, we can open negotiations tomorrow morning at 9:30.
Those who know the workings of Brussels well say the negotiations will be tough.
Money is never easy in this sort of discussion, everybody knows that. The fate of people stranded on either side of the new border, everybody agrees has to be sorted out as quickly as possible. And then there is Ireland.
Theresa May's motivation in calling this election was to strengthen her hand, to make her less vulnerable to pressure from committed Brexiteers within her own party. But with a hung parliament, she's now more exposed to trouble from all sides. Among those who will expect their voices to be heard are Theresa May's new allies, the Democratic Unionists of Northern Ireland. The Prime Minister has promised the Brexit negotiations will stick to the existing timetable, and leaving the single market remains the government's position. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News.
Let's stay with this Brexit challenge. I want to go to Brussels and talk to our Europe editor, Katya Adler. Katya, what is your reading of the potential impact of this election result on that Brexit process?
Well, right now, Hugh, there's very little sympathy here for what's seen as Theresa May's political own goal, but what there is a lot of frustration. We heard from the Vice President of the European Commission today, and she said, you know, the finger is so often pointed at Brussels, saying that it's so slow moving. And yet here we are, a year after the UK's referendum, EU referendum, and there's still big arguments about should this be a hard or a soft Brexit? Do we stay in the single market or do we leave? By comparison, Brussels is feeling very organised. It spent the last 12 months getting its Brexit negotiations ducks in a row, and it wants to get going. As we heard, Jean-Claude Juncker said, come over here, I'm ready for you as of 9:30 tomorrow morning. There's a feeling that the ball is now in the UK's court. The EU wants to get on with other matters like Eurozone problems and migration problems. But what we don't have here is sort of gleeful gloating at Theresa May's political woes. And that's because EU leaders are worried that a weak Prime Minister at number 10 will make it even harder to reach a Brexit deal. And why do they care? Well, they care because whatever is decided will impact on lives, jobs, businesses and politics in the EU too.
Katya, thank you. Katya Adler there, our Europe editor in Brussels. And let's get some response now from the financial markets, because they famously don't like uncertainty. And Simon Jack, our business editor, is in the City of London. Simon, talk us through the response there today.
Well, the hung Parliament result we got is the kind of certainty that markets famously hate. We saw the pound have a bit of a wobble. But in the wider business community, people are a little bit fed up because this, in many ways, is the worst possible outcome. They see this as weeks spent, valuable weeks of pre-Brexit negotiation prep time spent to try and get a political mandate, a stronger political base, which of course hasn't materialised. Having said that, I can tell you that the Business Secretary, Greg Clark, has had business leaders and lobby groups in today to listen to what they have to say. And many of them tell me that if, and it's a big if given the government's new political chums, they get wider voices into that debate, for example, youth and indeed business, which feels pretty marginalised so far, then that is no bad thing. Having said that, many of the business groups I talk to say that we're going into these negotiations with less clear objectives, a less clear game plan, and on a political foundation that most people think is very much weakened by this election result.
Simon, again, thanks very much. Simon Jack there, our business editor, with the views in the City of London for us. Well, tonight, 24 hours, nearly 25 hours after the polls closed across the United Kingdom, voters are slowly coming to terms with the features of this new political landscape. And our correspondent, John Kay, talked to voters throughout the day. He's been travelling from Dumfries all the way down to Stroud in Gloucestershire. This is his report.
Breakfast time at a truck stop in the Scottish borders.
Theresa May might have to move house.
And news is sinking in.
It's just completely upside down, isn't it?
Conservatives stacking up seats here, but losing their majority in Westminster.
You look gobsmacked.
Chaos, eh? That's what we didn't really need. Absolutely unbelievable.
At the till, Lee thinks Theresa May should blame herself.
She's focused too much on Brexit. Really, she's been trying to drive that down people's throats, and it's not really worked out for her.
But in the kitchen, Anne thinks a Tory-led coalition could be a good thing right now.
Maybe the best way to go and get views from both sides.
We head south, across the border, to find out why so many people who voted for Brexit last year voted Labour this time. Crewe, in Cheshire.
I was quite shocked, to be honest.
When new mum Gemma told me the Tories just hadn't connected with her.
You don't really come to places like this and see the actual real live people. They sort of, I feel, live in a bit of a bubble.
Theresa May will meet the Queen in the next half an hour.
Crewe has switched from Tory to Labour, and market trader Punchal said the Conservatives should have stuck to the issues he cares about.
What were you interested in? What do you want to hear?
Health. Schooling, education, prospects for my kids. I've got two boys who I don't know where they're going to get a job or anything like that.
Theresa has shot herself in the foot, actually, because a lot of the pensioners have been very unhappy. I've been a staunch supporter of her, but I'm very disappointed.
Did you vote for her?
Yes, I did.
We carry on, down through the Midlands. Labour has also won constituencies that voted to remain in the EU, like Stroud in rural Gloucestershire. This is now one of Jeremy Corbyn's seats.
I think they were resting on their laurels.
On the village green, we meet Pippa, a Tory voter, but she says Labour worked harder to tempt younger voters.
They really touched on what affected people, knocked on the door, said it, whereas I don't think the Conservatives put enough into that.
It feels like somebody you could actually believe in.
But Jim told me he was simply more impressed with Jeremy Corbyn than by Theresa May.
I wouldn't trust her as far as I could throw her. I really wouldn't.
But you'd trust him, Corbyn?
I think so, yeah. I'd certainly give him a chance.
So, hundreds of miles today, politics in flux, but life rolling on. John Kay, BBC News.
Back here in Downing Street, a final word with Laura Kuenssberg tonight. Laura, can we begin to describe the scale of the challenge that Mrs May faces?
I think it's going to be extremely difficult. This election was her risk and it backfired. It was meant to produce, dare I say, a more strong and stable government. Instead, she's ended up with something much weaker, with her guilty for taking the risk and failing to do it, but also with her fundamentally weakened. One minister said to me earlier tonight, maybe in time they will rally around Theresa May. The Tories like being in power and maybe they'll try to stick together. But that is not certain at all. But more broadly, I think we have seen in the last 24 hours us return, as we expected actually last week, to much more of the traditional two-party system, the red and blue, especially in England, although those bits of the map not necessarily popping up with those two colours where you would expect. A lot of unexpected results overnight, and also a lot of seats that were extremely close. And that suggests in a way that we've seen something again much more volatile. Just a month ago in the local elections, the Tories romped home. We saw a completely different kind of result. Different election, of course, but that suggests to me that the electorate is still very fluid, perhaps very, very changeable. But just finally, one big trend that may well have an impact in the years to come. We saw almost a whole new generation of voters going to the ballot box for the first time in far greater numbers than we have seen for a long time. That could, if it sticks, have very big implications for all the political parties in terms of the recipe of where they build their support in future. But certainly for Theresa May, this is nothing less than a political disaster. Her future is very uncertain. There won't be very many people resting easy in Downing Street tonight.
Again, Laura, thanks very much. Laura Kuenssberg there with the final word here in Downing Street. That is it from the BBC team here in Downing Street tonight. In a moment, we'll have the news where you are, but we'll leave you with some of the enduring sights and sounds of the past 24 hours as the voters of Britain refused to give Theresa May the big majority she sought and delivered a hung parliament with potentially far-reaching consequences for the months and years ahead. Have a good night.
And what we're saying is the Conservatives are the largest party. Note, they don't have an overall majority at this stage.
Unless the exit poll is incredibly wrong, the Prime Minister has failed to achieve her principal objective.
The worst possible outcome would be a hung parliament.
Politics has changed, and politics isn't going back.
You live by the sword and you die by the sword.
I am standing down today as the leader of UKIP with immediate effect.
Are you resigning, Prime? Are you stepping down, Mrs May?
I will now form a government that can provide certainty and lead Britain forward at this critical time for our country.
We will enter discussions with the Conservatives.
Now let's get to work.